Welcome to Detective Diaries, brought to you by private detectives, Answers Investigation. If you are captivated by the art of deduction, the thrill of solving the unsolvable, or the enigmatic world of private investigation, you've just found your new favourite podcast. Detective Diaries is where secrets unravel and the truth is always a clue away. Presented by private detectives, Answers Investigation. Each episode contains offbeat conversations about the real people involved in investigation.
Welcome again to Detective Diaries. Today, from the relaxed setting of Purchasers in Chichester, we're taking you through the art and science of investigative interviewing, a field that blends psychology, strategy, and the search for truth. I'm honoured today to be joined by a true titan in the world of forensic and criminal psychology, Professor Ray Bull. Professor Bull is widely regarded as the leading figure in investigative interviewing research. He's an emeritus professor of forensic psychology at the University of Leicester, here in England. For over 4 decades, his work has fundamentally reshaped how justice is pursued, most notably through his pioneering involvement in the peace method. This revolutionary framework moved police interviewing away from coercive interrogation towards an empathy-driven, non-coercive approach that prioritises rapport and psychological science over common-sense hunches. His work has not only shaped academia, but also police training programs internationally, from Europe and Canada to Asia, Africa and Latin America, advising police forces in over 35 countries and serving as an expert witness in more than 150 cases. His accolades are also quite vast. In 2022, he was recognised as a distinguished member of the American Psychological Law Society for his exceptional contributions to psychology and law. He served as the president of the European Association of Psychology and Law from 2014 to 2017, and as immediate past president from 2017 to 2020. Professor Bull is also an honorary fellow at the British Psychological Society, which is limited to no more than 40 living psychologists, awarded for his contribution to psychology. He's co-authored over 300 papers, with his work directly informing UK government guidelines, including the Memorandum of Good Practice for Interviewing Child Witnesses. The immensity of what my guest has achieved continues over decades, and while I would love to sit here and read through all of them, I don't think we'd have much of an episode left by the time I've done that. So, Professor Ray Bull, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you and for people to listen to what we have to say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much indeed. So, I suppose the first question I have is every day still a school day? You've co-authored over 300 papers. Are you still learning at this point?
Yes. I mean, we had a slightly earlier conversation today where you made a very good point that I would like to follow up on, which is when people are being interviewed in an investigation, for example, by the police or by another professional organization, are they more constrained when being video and audio recorded compared to being audio recorded only?
Indeed.
I'm not aware of anything on that in the investigative arena. There may be literature in other arenas like medical professional interviewing patients or in social work or the helping professions. But I haven't come across anything in the literature, which I tried to read quite a lot, within investigative interviewing. And I think it was last year or the year before, I was lucky enough to be invited to give a lecture in person at a university in Malaysia.
Okay.
And at question time, one of their PhD students said, and I'm now quoting him, "Professor, I very much like the idea that we get information not from students pretending to be victims, witnesses, or suspects, but we actually analyze things in real life." So he said the work you've cited on what people that are now in prison have got to say, or analyzing recorded interviews with suspects. He said, however, what about the people who have never been detected, who have never been interviewed and therefore are not in prison?
Right.
What about them? And I thought, oh gosh, what an interesting question.
Indeed.
And so much so that when Professor Becky Milne invited me in the journal that she edits, she was editing a version celebrating the journal's 25 years. And so she invited me to write about my 25 years. I finished the article with that student's question.
Amazing, amazing.
Yes,
So
always learning.
Always learning and always developing. It's quite interesting, as you just said, there are particular niche fields perhaps within the investigative interviewing
Yes.
that are still yet to be explored. So every day is a school day.
Yes.
Did you find that still quite joyous when you perhaps come across something new or something that hasn't been explored and you think that's what I want to go into?
Yeah, absolutely, because it confirms that there's still more to learn, as Albert Einstein said. And I'm quoting Einstein, if I may.
Of course, please.
So he said, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
Right.
And I've got that saying on the wall in my office.
Oh, brilliant. So it's sort of a daily motto and reminder to you,
Yes.
perhaps. Excellent, excellent. So obviously, investigative interviewing, as I said in the introduction, you are a man who has decades of experience about this, but what area perhaps do you most enjoy researching when looking at this field?
Well, as you kindly said in your introduction, many years ago, my focus with colleagues, including then Becky Milne doing her PhD, was how best to interview children who may have had a negative experience in order to get information from them. And a lot of people around the world did really good work on that. So we know what to do. It's the ability to do it is the issue.
Right.
So we have guidance around the world, more recently from the European Association of Psychology and Law that you mentioned. And all that guidance has the same skeleton, the same guidance, irrespective of where it's been published.
Right.
So we, as I say, we know what to do. But as I was coming to realize that we know what to do for interviewing children, I thought, what's a field that's not been so well developed? I'm talking decades ago.
Sure.
And that was the field of interviewing suspected persons, mostly adults rather than children.
Sure.
So I then moved into doing work on interviewing suspects, probably about 25 years ago or more. Yeah, so that's what I focused on up till today.
Brilliant. It's such an expansive field, and you sort of mentioned the particulars there of perhaps what techniques would be applied when interviewing children, and perhaps what would be applied when you're dealing with a difficult subject. But I mean, obviously, your methodology, the PEACE methodology, are you able to sort of take us through a little bit of that, just
Yes.
an executive summary, if one can ask? Such
Yes, but I think it would be interesting for listeners just to spend a short time explaining how it came about.
Yes, very good.
And so England and Wales, as far as I'm aware, were the first countries that by law had to tape record the interviewing of suspects. And this was from 1986, when video recording was extremely expensive. So it only began audio recording. Now, of course, there's a lot of video. So from 1986, the police had to audio record the interviewing of suspects. And then the government, quite rightly, and the chiefs of police wondered whether that newly recorded interviewing was of a sufficient quality. And there were 4 studies, 2 by the government and 2 by police officers for their PhDs. And these 4 studies on different samples from different forces all came to the same conclusion, which was the interviewing, though it was not coercive, it was not wrong, as had been in some cases in the past, and is still the case in many other countries, it wasn't very skilled. And then when they wondered, why are the people who had the difficult job of interviewing suspects not very skilled? The obvious answer was, well, they didn't have any training. There was no training, no national agreed training. So the government and chiefs of police set up a committee of 12 detectives in 1990 to develop a philosophy and training on how to initially interview suspects. And it was those detectives who came up with this PEACE method. But why it includes a lot of psychology is that one of the people who was doing his PhD on the initially recorded interviews, a wonderful guy called Tom Williamson, who was a rising star in the London police, he realized, because he himself had a degree in psychology, that some aspects of psychology, in his opinion, were relevant
Right.
to the interviewing of suspects. So what he did was he got a small number of psychologists, lucky enough, including myself, to meet with him on Sundays in our own free time and gather together everything in psychology and allied disciplines that could be possibly of use to that committee who had to come up with training.
Right.
And in those days, there was almost no research directly on interviewing suspects, the skills needed. There was work on how not to do it. You know,
Sure.
it's not a good idea to be very aggressive because it's against the law. But what Tom had realized is that in other aspects of human behavior where a professional is talking with a person who may not want to tell you a lot, is in clinical psychology, the training in medics, particularly those who work in sexually transmitted diseases, where the person you're talking with might want some treatment but doesn't want to tell you everything about the contacts, even though you need to know who the contacts are such that they can get checked out.
Yes.
So there were a lot of arenas. Obviously, what you want to do if the evidence is strong in a democracy where most suspects do have relevant knowledge, is you want that suspect to provide the relevant knowledge,
Indeed.
including that they might be innocent. And so Tom realized that getting that person to change their mind from not wanting to tell to tell, he realized that there was research in consumer psychology and attitude change in marketing on how you ethically get somebody to stop doing something, you know, buying Wizzo, and buy something else, buy your own product.
Yes.
And so what we did was we wrote down all this, or we collected all this information into an unpublished, rather big book. And then Tom gave it to the chairperson of the 12 male detectives. And we had no idea whether they would take any notice of it whatsoever. Why should they?
Right.
They were experienced detectives who mostly started policing when they were 18, and in those days.
Sure. It's a question of bringing the academia world into what
those guys, you know, had very limited academic experience themselves. So we were quite prepared for them to totally ignore what we had developed. However, to my amazement, when I worked at the University of Portsmouth, a parcel arrived, a large parcel, and it was at the time of IRA and other issues. And so any organization, when an unexpected parcel arrives, security call you and say, are you expecting this parcel? And I said, no, I'm not expecting a parcel. And they said, well, apparently it comes from the police, but we don't know whether to believe that. And I said, oh, yeah, I think it will be okay. And they opened it and it was okay. And then it came to me.
Right.
And it was amazing because the covering note said from the 12 detectives, dear Professor, we have decided to incorporate into our training a lot of that psychological stuff.
Excellent.
But we have been told that our training has to be understood by every police officer, even early career police officers, some of whom may left school at 16.
Right.
So we have written our draft guidance that's in this parcel in everyday street language. And we are worried that we have mistranslated, misinterpreted those highfalutin psychological notions into concrete street language. So can you go through it and tell us where we've got it wrong?
Right.
It was amazing. They hadn't got anything wrong.
Fantastic.
There were a few arenas where I could help improve the communication of the concept. And that became what those police officers called the peace method. They had realized that to get somebody to decide to talk to you, you have to behave in the normal street language word, meaning of behave peacefully, not coercively.
Yes.
But they realized that what they were advocating, and this is where the 5 letters PEACE come in, that you're more likely to be successful if you can plan and prepare before your interview. So that's the P.
That's the P, yep.
Then they realized that, at least in the UK, you're required by law to explain to a suspect why they are in the interview. You are not required to tell them everything you know,
Nope.
particularly information that may not be incriminating. They happen to be in a certain town on the day the crime was committed. That's not very incriminating. They could have been doing anything
Exactly.
in that town. So you have to explain. And then the crucial point is they realized that to enable a person to be more willing to tell you, you need to engage them in conversation, not yet about the alleged crime,
Right.
but about something from the planning and preparation that you know that interviewee is interested in, that you yourself are genuinely interested in. You can't fake it.
No.
And so something that almost everybody's interested in, if you don't know any match between the suspect and yourself, is, certainly in the UK, to talk about the weather or some big thing that's in the national news that almost everybody knows about. So you try to engage the person in conversation
Build that rapport.
that will reduce their anxiety, shows your own humanity. That normally can be achieved. And then you gradually move into gaining a relevant account.
This is the A.
So this is the A. And there are various ways of best getting the account. And one way is to invite the person to talk in their own words and not yet question them.
Yes.
So when and if they have finished whatever they want to say, you can then ask your questions that come from your planning and preparation.
Right.
And then normally at the end of the questioning, an interview would have finished, but these detectives realize there is more to do. And this is the C of peace,
Yes.
which is called closure.
Closure.
Where you try to provide an effective summary of what the person says, which of course, the more they've said, the more difficult it is to summarize it correctly.
Indeed.
And then you say, is there anything more you'd like to add? And quite often, if people have provided some information, providing an account, hopefully correctly back to them, what we say in psychology, cues off more things. And they say, oh, yes, now I remember so-and-so.
The prompt.
And then when you finish talking about what they've said and if and when they're telling you anything, again, you might think the interview is finished, but it's not. Because the second part of closure is to go back to what you talked about in rapport. So if the interviewee, whether suspect in the early days or witness or victim, has chosen to tell you something that's been difficult for them to tell you, you have a professional duty that they don't leave the room in that negative state that's caused by them telling you, but you try to help them relax, and you might go back and talk about the weather or soccer or President Trump,
whatever it may
for
be,
another 10 minutes. So when they walk out of that room, they think you've done a good job, even if they've in detail confessed to a serious crime.
Yes.
They feel that they have been treated well. They will tell other people about that, and so on. So that's the interviewing finished.
Right.
But we have the final E of peace.
Indeed.
Which is evaluation. Obviously, given that the information is recorded, you and others as the investigator can evaluate the information, but also, of course, a recording enables you and a trusted colleague to evaluate what you did well, so you know you can do that, what you did reasonably that you need to improve, and if and when you did anything that you wouldn't have chosen to do, let's loosely call that unskilled or wrong.
Sure.
You think, oh yeah, I interrupted too often.
Right.
So that's the peace model. That's what those guys came up with, informed by psychology.
So at that point in time, as you say, this was kind of the pioneering aspects of researching into investigative interviewing. It kind of brings me back to a topic we were just touching on before we began the episode. But how did you get into this? Because it's obviously such an interesting field. You were right there pioneering it, but obviously you had done some research prior to this involvement of the new
Yes.
methodology. So how did you get into it?
Well, I was fortunate enough to do my undergraduate 3 years and my graduate 3 years in psychology at the University of Exeter,
Mhm.
where I learned quite a lot about different parts of psychology, and the part of psychology to do with memory and related topics, which is called cognitive psychology.
Indeed.
So my first very junior, used to call it lectureship, now they called it junior professorship. You know, I was still in my 20s, so it wasn't very grand. It was in cognitive psychology at one of the universities in London. And it was a big department, and we had like 7 cognitive psychologists, some people more expert in perception than memory. But one of the other cognitive psychologists in memory with whom I was initially lucky enough to share an office, called Brian Clifford, we decided in the mid 1970s, just after I'd started there, and he started the year before me, to write a book about the psychology of what's now called eyewitness testimony. So it was more about memory than interviewing.
Right.
So we published one of the first books in 78 on that. And then I became more interested in, well, surely a person's produced memory of an event depends upon how well they're questioned.
Right.
So I gradually, in the 80s, got a bit interested in that. And then I was fortunate enough, I enjoyed the job in London. I had wonderful colleagues, but they, in the nicest possible way, said, it's time for you to leave, because you know, I'd been promoted within.
Right.
We had a wonderful head of department, so that job wasn't available to me. And people said, oh, maybe you should, you know, apply to be a head somewhere else. So I was lucky enough to get a job in Glasgow. And as it was being announced that I was moving to Glasgow, I took up the job in 1987, so it became public knowledge in 1986. A person in Scotland who had been very expert on eyewitnessing in children, Dr. now Professor Rona Flynn, that I had met at some conferences, contacted me from where she was based in Aberdeen. There were family homes in Glasgow, and said, is it true that you're coming to Scotland? And I said, yes. She said, well, the Scottish government are very interested in how to improve the way that children are questioned and children testify in criminal trials.
Right.
And so she said, would I join with her in submitting a bid to the Scottish government to study children giving evidence? And probably because of her, we were successful in getting that funding. So we then observed children testifying in the old way, which is right in the courtroom, in front of the accused, possibly in front of the public, obviously in front of the jury.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the crucial questions that the Scottish government wanted us to answer was, how well do the lawyers talk to young children, you know, particularly lawyers who may not have had the benefit of having children themselves. So that's where the interviewing of persons relevant to justice, initially children, that's where it started.
Excellent. You mentioned before, though, about how there were chances and how that opportunity was new to you, in the sense of, this is something that hasn't been done. It's a chance to go and explore it.
Yes.
And that it must be fantastic to see that opportunity then bring
Yes.
you all the way up until today,
Yes.
where, as you know, you co-authored on these 300 documents. That's quite rewarding in that sense, but also, as you say, you're still learning. So,
well, I was still learning, and of course, in many professions, including your own, one has the feeling, hopefully, an honest feeling, that you're doing something of benefit to society. And that's always been very important to many people, including myself.
Agreed. There's every opportunity to learn more skills, more knowledge.
Yes.
And that's so important, I think.
Yes.
Again, it's why it's a real pleasure to sit down with yourself, because I'm sure I'm going to walk away from today and think, wow, there's certainly some techniques and ideas that might necessarily cross my path before today.
Well, we'll wait to the end of this conversation to see your presumption is a correct one.
I mean, it does bring me on to one aspect. So the persistent myth about investigative interviewing that you think actually harms investigations, because as I said at the start, you've obviously worked with a variety of police forces.
Yes.
Is there, a persistent issue or a myth about the interviewing that you think actually harms the
Yes.
process? And
Yes.
what is that?
Yes. I mean, a lot of things that psychologists have studied and therefore, if we can say, have found to be true, are the same as common sense.
Right.
That's not a waste of time because it supports people if they feel, say, in child rearing, that what common sense suggests is backed up by research. They're even more determined to do what they already thought they would do.
Indeed.
More rarely, psychology and other disciplines comes up with something that's the opposite of common sense. And this is an example. A good friend of mine in California, Professor Richard Leo, is a wonderful guy. But when I'm talking about Richard, he doesn't know this. I sometimes say he's a crazy guy. People say, why? I said, because he's got 2 doctorates. I mean, most people climb intellectually Mount Everest to get 1 doctorate. Richard's got 2, one in psychology and one in law. And he's a great writer. And many years ago, in one of his most important books, probably 2008, something like that, he made the point that common sense tells us that if a professional such as a police officer is interviewing a suspect, and in democracies most suspects have relevant information and some of them did do it, the common sense view is that a guilty suspect, particularly of a serious crime which might involve 25 years imprisonment or more, the common sense view is they will never spontaneously, voluntarily tell you what they've done.
Yes.
That common sense view is actually wrong. And
Okay.
it's taken 30 years of research to prove that. And that is still an issue around the world with some professional investigators who are left to rely on their common sense because they get no training. They might be in a country where training is not important or where there's no money for training, as in the developing world. And what a lot of research has shown, particularly research with me and my wonderful co-authors, is that if you are skilled enough to interview in a way following the peace method and something we might talk about later more recently called the Mendes Principles, part of a UN initiative, then if you are skillful enough to adopt what research tells us about interviewing, what you do find is quite a lot of people who have actually committed serious crime will tell you. Another thing that research has found out began with my good friend Professor Mark Kebbell in Australia, who was one of the first to get permission to talk with people now in prison convicted of crime.
Right.
Therefore, most of them in democracy were guilty, not many false convictions.
Sure.
What their intention was when they walked into that interview or interrogation room. And what Mark found was enormously surprising, was that a certain proportion were intent on denying, but that was about 25-30%.
Okay.
An equal proportion said that when they went into the interview, they were going to tell the truth about what they'd done. These were sex offenders.
Right.
And the majority said they had not yet made up their mind. And when Mark asked and his colleagues asked them, well, what were you waiting for? They said, I was waiting for 2 things. One's obvious, the evidence, but the other one was how they treated me. And that how they treated me was first studied by a detective in Sweden called Ulf Holmberg 25 years ago. I had the pleasure of being the assessor of Ulf's PhD at the university in Sweden. And Ulf also managed to get permission to do research on people now in prison. And In those days in Sweden, there was no national training.
Right.
There is now. I was lucky enough to play a minor role recently in the development of a national training and philosophy for the Swedish police. But in those days, as it was the case in England many years ago, the police were just doing their best.
Yes.
And what these people in prison said, so half of them, through a questionnaire that Ulf gave them, reported that they were treated in a coercive, arrogant, common sense way.
Right.
The other half said that they were treated politely. Ulf labelled the behaviour that they talked, the police showed them, as humane.
Right.
And the crucial finding of Ulf's work was that more of those who said their interviewing was humane had chosen to confess. So that relates to what Mark found about people in prison. Some of them are willing to tell you, but only if you behave appropriately. Others have not yet decided, so how you behave is also important for them. And of course, those whose intention was denied, there is research on this. How do you assist a person that you think is guilty, who in fact is guilty, who initially plans to deny?
Right.
How do you shift them
Yes.
to deciding to tell the truth?
Yes.
And so we've done some work on that. My last sentence in this answer is, I had the pleasure at Portsmouth of supervising the work of Stavrula Sukara, and we got permission from a UK police organisation to analyse their interviewing. And in her final study, she analysed a sample of interviews in which the person interviewed humanely under the peace method, initially was not talking or actively denying, and then at a point later in the interview shifted to providing information that showed that they were guilty. And what Stavrula found was the skills that underpin the humane method were the ones that were being displayed in the time up to a denying suspect deciding to tell the truth.
Fascinating. It's quite interesting because, I mean, for the younger listeners, perhaps they might have the Life on Mars in their heads with the DC's aggressive tone,
Yes.
physical as well, presence being quite important. You know, a large person coming into the room, throwing chairs around. You know, advocating that sort of I'm serious, you're going to shut up and listen to me, when actually what you're saying, and it's very interesting because it kind of leads me on to about ethical methods and outperforming coercive ones, are the true and tried and tested better way and better methodologies here.
And what happens, of course, is that when people receive not just what I've said, but information that illustrates based on research that a more humane way is more effective, then they say, oh yeah, I see that. It's not as if it's stupid, but they don't think of it. So the common sense view is the aggressive coercive, because based on the assumption that people will not tell me.
Yes.
And then when you go through the research, and when I'm working with police and other investigators around the world who have never had the opportunity to be updated as to what research and professional practice tells us, when you explain it, they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And they relate maybe to their own personal life when they might have wanted to get a family member, perhaps a teenage boy, son. You have to get your teenage son to tell you about what that funny smell is.
Yes. Without them going and defending themselves, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me.
So when you explain it, it then becomes common sense, but it wasn't common sense until you explained it.
Yes, I think it's very poignant, actually, the general presumption when someone is going to interview someone, that preface is, well, they're not going to tell me anything. They're not going to open up. And I think you're so right. If you are entering an interview with that mindset, you've kind of already lost, right? From that starting point, because it is that presumption that kills, essentially.
Well, yes. I mean, you will be right, but for the minority of interviewees, because following on from Mark's brilliant research, there was a study in Canada of people in prison, and then I was lucky enough to work with a wonderful rising star in American psychology, Professor Haley Cleary, who managed to get access to more than 500 people recently put in prison, in jail, I should say, in the USA. And one of the many things we did, led by Haley, is to get the kind of information from people in prison that the previous researchers had done, plus some new things. And even in the USA, which we might view as a more coercive society where people are more used to coercion, even in the sample of people recently put in jail, the same finding occurred, that it was a minority who went into the interrogation, they told us, with the intent to deny. The majority were open-minded, some intended to tell the truth. So we have now 3 studies. We need more studies, but they're in different countries. That underpins that what you need is a method of interrogating, using the American word, or interviewing, which takes account of the fact that some people will deny or want to deny initially. Some people are open-minded, some people want to tell the truth. How do you have a method that copes with all 3 of those?
Yes.
And the answer is the peace method.
Indeed. We always like to end on sort of the younger listeners, people who are perhaps going into fields, whether it be education, whether it be going to this kind of work. What's a message that you can pass on to them, perhaps about your own experiences, or those looking to go into interviewing, psychology, any realms like that, or any words that you could pass on to them?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything necessarily that they would not have had the benefit of hearing before, but I think to be not too fixed in your plans, to have some kind of idea, but to be open-minded to something unexpected that could be actually quite interesting and fruitful. So be open to what people sometimes call what seems to be chance events. Obviously, it has to be something in which you can genuinely be enthusiastic.
Yes.
So to have a rough idea, it's very difficult. I'm thinking back when I was a teenager, did I have any rough idea of what I was good at? I probably didn't. But if you can get good feedback from people you love and trust about what you are good at and what you're not so good at, then of course, to go down a road in which you have your better skills, I think that would be very useful to help people decide what to do.
Wise words indeed. Wise words indeed. Professor Bull, thank you again so much. It really has been a pleasure to hear your insight and wealth of experience. I know there's going to be a lot of people listening who will learn from this, especially myself, about those techniques and things that drive an investigative interview. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure.
Hi, I'm Professor Emma Short, cyber psychologist at London Metropolitan University. So come and listen to me talk on Detective Diaries. We had an incredible hour talking about the online environment, how it may enable crime, when watching crosses the line and perhaps becomes snooping, and also what happens when the crowd takes control of an investigation.
Get involved. Detective Diaries is interactive, which involves you, the listener. Do you have a case you'd like discussed? A burning question about investigative life? Send an email to podcast@private-detectives.co.uk or reach out via social media. You may hear your story featured in an upcoming episode. Don't forget to leave your contact details. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, brought to you by Answers Investigation and UK Fingerprint. If you've enjoyed our conversation and want to learn more about the fascinating world of investigations, be sure to check out Private Detective's Answers Investigation. Their experienced team offers a wide range of discreet and professional services, helping you find the answers you need with integrity and expertise. If you're interested in fingerprint analysis or require specialist fingerprint services, don't miss UK Fingerprint. As one of the leading fingerprint companies in the UK, they provide everything from identification to background checks, working with individuals, businesses, financial institutions, and gambling companies. To find out more, visit www.private-detectives.co.uk, that's a minus sign, and www.ukfingerprint.co.uk. These are your go-to resources for investigative solutions and fingerprint expertise. You can call them